In today's episode of the KC Sports Authority podcast, we switch things up. The Chiefs are on a bye week, and the Major League Baseball season has come to an end with the World Series now being finished. So, maybe the perfect time, if any, to talk some Royals offseason. And that's what we're going to get into tonight with special guest host Cody Tapp of 610 Sports Radio, co-host with Alex Gold on the Cody and Gold Show, 10 to 2, Monday through Friday on 610 Sports Radio, is going to join us to talk a little bit of Royals off season. So let's get going, guys. So welcome in Cody Tapp. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really grateful that you can spend some time to hop on with us, man. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Yeah, baseball season, it's weird because free agency has actually started. So if the Royals are going to have a busy offseason, I would think it's going to start here at some point soon. So I guess we'll see.
Right, and you would think no one in Kansas City knows it because of how well the Chiefs are going. But, you got to take advantage of the bye week and get the Royals takes off. First off, before we get into, some of the free agent stuff, I know this season was abysmal. I don't know if even abysmal is an appropriate word for how bad it was. But, what are a few bright spots outside of maybe Cole Reagans and Bobby, which everyone knows, that kind of you took away from the season? We're going to stay on the positives here.
Yeah, those two, no doubt, right? When the team announced their organizational awards, it was like Player of the Year, Bobby Wood Jr. You're like, yeah, that tracks. And Pitcher of the Year, Cole Reagans. Yeah, okay. Outside of that, Maikel Garcia was easily the best story of the season because nobody was really anticipating him coming up and becoming a full-time big leaguer day one. So that felt big. And honestly, the pitching is, to me, the bad story because at the very least, out of the position players, we know that we got some answers on guys. But Michael Massey, he kind of did the Nicky Lopez thing. Hey, he's a Gold Glove caliber second baseman, but he's got way more pop. I still think Vinny will pencil in to either DH or first base on that side. Maikel Garcia on the opposite side of the diamond. And then maybe you got some answers on whether or not, you've got some good outfielders. And if you added one really good outfielder, maybe you'd be okay for the rest. I saw signs offensively that at least give me a little bit of hope there going forward. The pitching was a mess. So I don't have a lot of positives on that end other than maybe they got the steal of the century in trading Aroldis Chapman, even if he did matter in a World Series title run for the Rangers. Because if you got your number one starter, then I don't really care what you did there. It's also proof that you can build good bullpen arms out of anything. He's a 1-year contract for nothing.
Right, exactly. And they also stole James MacArthur, which I know is only a month. He could blow up in April and May. We know that. But, there were a few good pitching signs, and I think we just hit all of them with those two names right there.
That might be the end of the list. Singer was fine for a decent chunk of the year. I think Singer's just one of those, if you're a 3 or 4 starter in this league, you have some ups and downs. And, just as long as you hover near that and you don't completely implode, I'll live.
Right. The overall numbers don't look great, but if you break it down by months and certain starts, it was he was more than serviceable throughout the year for sure. So with that being said, with the pitching being a mess, are you see the Royals making some moves in that regard, or are they still kind of in this hold on to on the money and don't spend anything?
Look, I've said on the air, this is the single most important year for the Royals in franchise history. This is their biggest offseason. Not only do they have to try to fix the on-field product, they got to convince people to help pay for a brand new downtown stadium. It is a very busy offseason, and it's kind of a big swing year for, do you think Sherman will put his money there? And my guess is that this year he will, because I don't think you can really hang on to the once we know, then we'll spend. They spent the entire year evaluating their players. So yeah, I think they'll spend it there. Now, Scott Boras today at the GM meetings was like, oh, super competitive. Every pitcher is going to go for $1 million, tens of millions of dollars. You're like, all right, well, that's Boras. Right. And I would assume him to say that. But it's a decent pitching market, but you'll probably have to overspend because the Royals are back in this. The problem is they're back in the pay the bad team tax. You hope it's not like Jose Guillen or those types of things, but they're in the pay a little more than you should team tax, and that's just kind of the reality of their situation. But I assume they'll spend more this year than they have in years.
So I got to ask you this, and right off the bat, what would it take, and what would you be willing to part with for the Royals to do anything possible to go after Shohei Ohtani.
Oh God!
Oh, just
obviously it's
Adam.
not going to
He
happen.
could have partial ownership of the team if they'd let him.
Oh my God.
God, I mean, he might still end up in the Midwest. That's what's so frustrating. I think the
Cubs.
second that the Cubs paid $8 million for Craig Counsell, that was their statement to the league that, like, hey, we might be willing to pay $500 million.
Yeah, the Cubs are the team that keep popping up in my mind as a potential landing spot. It doesn't just feel like he's going to stay on the West Coast just to stay on the West Coast. Like baseball wants to get him in a market where he can show up on TV.
I think so too, but I will say, in speaking to a lot of general managers or front office people over the years, the overseas guys like the coast. I mean, there's a reason why the Royals have a harder time competing with Japanese or overseas players in that regard, because the people who go through the posting system, they do like being in LA and New York and Philly and Seattle. Like, they like those markets because it makes it more functional for their life at home, or for a variety of other reasons. It might just be easier for their family to watch back home. I think that that's a factor for the Royals. And when they go for these, hey, maybe they're interested in whichever guy's coming up next in the posting system. It's been hard for them because those guys tend to go to the coast. But I mean, I'd do anything for Shohei. I just, it was like for the longest time, I was like, oh man, it's like watching Babe Ruth. It's complete. I've never seen a player like him. And I know that he's hurt again, but I mean, I don't know.
Where do you think he ends up?
God, if I had to get, I'm trying to think. Like, obviously he's not going to end up back with the Angels. Why the hell would you? I wouldn't spend any more time with that organization or take those chances. I mean, my guess is always the same. It's New York or Boston or the Mets. The Mets might pay any amount of money for anybody, so maybe it's them. That was always the interesting thing. Like, I think the argument people always try to make with like Shohei to the Royals is, if you paid him $500 million and it didn't work, you'd be bankrupt. You're like, no, you wouldn't. Yeah. Like, I know that it's like half of your franchise's value, but that's just not how it works. Mm-hmm. The Marlins gave Giancarlo Stanton $325 million. He never performed at the level that they were accustomed to when he was there. They're not destitute. Like, they were in the playoffs like last year. So it's like, I mean, it stinks if they're no good, but I mean, I don't know how much money you'd have to throw at Shohei to convince him to come to Kansas City, because you're going to have to convince him you're winning immediately, and because he's probably sick of what happened in LA.
Yeah, enough about the jokes now there, Keegan. Like, we don't need to float these.
Had at least asked that one. I know everyone's wondering where's Shohei going. If the Royals are going to be big spenders, they got to be in on Shohei.
Probably not that big,
Yeah, that's how much of the percentage of the current payroll over the last 5-6 years, so. But no, for real, like realistic targets, because I think there's guys that are obviously priced out. You've got the Shoheis. I think Jordan Montgomery is someone that I would have originally wanted, has priced himself out. Who are some guys that like maybe are still in that range that are realistic? Because the Royals need probably a 1, 2, and 3. I know we like Reagans and Singer, but like if you can further down, you can push them, the better off they're going to be, obviously.
Yeah, probably. I would be really interested in Montgomery or I'm trying to remember who else stood out that like would be too expensive, like Stroman, but probably too expensive, right? If you start going that range. But I mean, if you spend enough, maybe you can be in that target. Realistically, let's say they just say Reagans is their 1 and Singer's their 3, and we all know, right, that Jordan Lyles is their 5.
Yeah,
okay.
I have no issue with 2. I'm one of the few people that like it doesn't bother me with where this team currently is at.
It's also just he's been a 5 on a lot of bad teams, and he's the easiest person to shove out if literally any other pitcher you've drafted gets healthy this year and is good. Hello, Daniel Lynch or Chris Bubich. You still have 4 or 5 options to shove Jordan Lyles out of the way. So if at any point they shove him out of the way, good. If not, he'll pitch his 180 innings and physically show up to work every day, which is more than either of those guys and multiple other guys have been able to do, right? Just physically be there. So that means they need 2. I think if you're not going to go higher end, right? If it's not going to be this is probably unrealistic, not Shohei unrealistic, but they're not getting Jordan Montgomery, Giolito, Kyle Gibson. Like, I mean, those are some of the names that stand out to me no, they're not the sexiest names in the list, but buying low at that range to get up in there is what it happens. I think this is like where they missed on like Jake Odorizzi when he went to Minnesota like 5 or 6 years ago. where he was not an expensive player. He was like 2 for 20, 2 for 25 at that time. And if you had just paid someone like that, you either would have had an incredible trade asset, which is what it turned into Minnesota, or you would have had your 2 or 3 starter. I think that that's probably the range they should be in, and they should probably be in the range of buying 2 of them. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how you just go for one and actually convince yourself that this is a rotation. I think I'd rather take my chances with all the young arms in the bullpen and just throw caution to the wind and go cheap there and just see if any of these flamed out starters all pieced together with a couple of random, James MacArthur type deals
Right.
can work out as a bullpen.
A couple other names I was going to throw out there just to see if either of you guys, one, think it's realistic, or to me, it just Seth Lugo is one that keeps popping up on different lists I see that doesn't seem like he's going to be too expensive. He just kind of feels like one of those potential Royal signings. But I've been looking at a couple other guys that maybe struggled this last year and need a bounce back. Guys like Luis Severino, Frankie Montas, both struggled tremendously this last year with the Yankees and probably aren't going to be back there. But guys like that, Michael Wacha, one I thought was interesting, and I don't know if Royals would be interested in going back to a familiar name, but a guy like Sean Manaea.
I mean, I got to assume that the Royals are as high on him as anybody, as he was like their number one, although they were willing to let him go, so maybe not as high as we think. But Manaea, Wacha, those all fall in. This is how I assume that they'll stack it, right? The way you're saying. They'll find one guy who's like a pretty proven major league starter that everybody was willing to pay. And then they're going to have to find the guy that is, let's hope we got the right redemption guy. Right? I mean, I'd be fine with most of those names. I don't think I'd want Wacha more than I'd want Manaea or some of those others. But, I mean, you're just banking on, please save me redemption guys. I think there's worse ways to do that. That's why people will mention like, Matt Moore, who's in the bullpen in 2022. The Royals like those guys who got shoved to a bullpen, but maybe they move back to a starter. But if they end up in the bullpen again, it's fine. His name's like I'm just describing Mike Minor, but it's, like they'll go that way sometimes with their 4th starter too, which I'm okay with because you can sometimes find value either way.
Yeah, and I'm okay with them just taking some risks or, like that because they just need pitching. And, if you sit back and just let everyone else go by and you don't maybe spend a couple extra million on a guy because you're scared to spend the money, that's going to bug me more than if they sign a Michael Wacha and he sucks for 3 years. Like, obviously that's going to hurt. You don't want that to happen, but like, I would rather that be the case than just them let it go by.
Yeah, me too. I think the problem is, and so I think people forget, like, this is why I'm still like a believer in JJ Picollo, is a couple of years ago when he wasn't even the GM, he was in charge of revamping the hitting development. Okay, well, they kind of did it like most good big league teams where you're like, I don't even know who this person is. And they come up and they like get on base and they're relatively successful and they're like a perfectly fine average big leaguer. And then you have a couple of surprises in there. Okay, great. That's kind of a perfect ratio. You have to remember, like, Vinny Pasquantino was not like a high prospect, high up in their organization. He just hitting really well and got called up. Michael Garcia, again, earned his spot and just kind of stayed there. And then you find all these other guys where it's just like Drew Waters, right? Who's like a perfectly fine big league player. He's not going to move the needle one way or the other, but he's fine. That's what the Cardinals did for all those years, like when injuries would happen. They just changed the pitching like a year ago. And because I don't think their systems were in place that helped them with guys that, we'll probably never see, like Asa Lacy, or like guys we will see, but God knows when, and like Frank Mazzucato. They don't have like somebody in the minors ready to take a starting job. So they're going to have to buy starting pitching. I don't know who in the minors, unless I'm missing somebody that's just going to like step in and be ready. It's all the same names we're used to from the last like 3 years.
Yeah, it just feels like they've got 4 to 8 different guys in the system that are all about the same. Either not good enough to be a consistent starter, but don't quite have a flashy enough stuff to be a strong bullpen piece. They're kind of in that no man's land, and they've had plenty of opportunity to showcase themselves. Daniel Lynch, Jackson Kowar, and the bunch, of course. But yeah, it feels like we're kind of in that middle ground of, if we're not going to go out and buy starting pitching, then that pitching development change we've seen, it's got to start making results like this offseason going to next year. Because if not, then we're going to be sitting here like we have been for the last 4 years in this rebuild and not going anywhere. But you kind of mentioned some of the offensive guys. So let's switch to that side of the game here. Who are the obvious guys on this team that you feel comfortable with being part of this core moving forward? And then who are the guys that you either still have a lot of questions with or ones that you're just, I'm done.
Okay, so I still have questions about Michael Massey. I know I'm supposed to have the full answer on him, but he's good enough defensively.
Yeah.
So I'm intrigued. And he does have way more power than you were used to at second base. So like part of me is like, I'll kind of accept the rest of the flaws if he's got the potential to be a 20 home run hitter from second base and plays really good defense. So at least for this year, I'm good there. Obviously, Bobby, I'm sold on. Michael, I'm good. I think Vinny can just hit. I think he is just like, no matter what, the second he gets healthy, he can hit. So I'm fine there too. The outfield is where I start. I mean, I'll keep playing a few of them, but I wouldn't say that I'm like sold. That's where I feel like if you're going to spend like outside of like the pitching, if you're going to spend this offseason, spend it in the corners, because those guys and like MJ Melendez, it's like, I'm not sure he doesn't have more value for someone as a catcher still versus like a left or right fielder. And he got better and the power is definitely there, but is he a full-time outfielder? I don't know. And if they moved on from Salvi, they obviously don't think he's like a great defensive catcher, but could they get him high enough that they felt like they could play him kind of a mix of the two spots? I think MJ can hit. I think he probably will be a good or above average major league hitter. The problem is the same thing we used to talk about when people used to try to shove Salvador Perez to first base is Salvador Perez's offensive numbers for a catcher, translatable, makes you the best hitting catcher in baseball. Yeah. When you take those same numbers and you put him at first base, he's like an average first baseman. But then he's a below average defensive. That's what happens with MJ. You take those numbers, you put him at catcher, he's a great hitting catcher. You take him, you put him in right field, there's a lot of right fielders who can hit, and they can play better right field. So I'm interested in him as a big leaguer. I think he's probably a 10-year big leaguer. I just don't know if he fits what the Royals are doing right now. So he's probably the next closest. Anybody else, I'm open to options.
How do you feel about the acquisition of Nelson Velasquez and his ceiling moving forward?
That's another one of those, like normally I would be, I'll be honest, you got to be kind of cautious on like 27-year-old outfielders or 26-year-old outfielders who couldn't even get on the field for the team they were with. But if the Royals are going to start being the team who's somehow, like weirdly enough, this has nothing to do because they're completely different players, them finding more value in Cole Reagans than the Rangers had in Cole Reagans kind of makes me feel a little bit better about, okay, maybe they found more value in a guy in Nelson Velasquez than they do. His power, we talked about MJ's, his is very real. I like him. I just think I would prefer, he's like the back-end starter for me. I want Velasquez to play like 100 games a year and hit 25 homers, but I don't want to see him every day yet.
Right.
So
and probably definitely not in a corner outfield spot.
No.
The defensive ability was definitely lacking down the stretch.
Yeah, and look, if they're going to play Vinny at first, maybe, or they want to go back, like however they want to play, it's okay. Like maybe they want to take one more look at Prado, but like if they want to move those guys around and float DH like really good baseball teams do, that's fine. But I want him to be like the opposite Paulo Orlando. He's your fourth outfielder because he hits a bunch of homers versus plays good defense, which I've been asking for the Royals for years. I'm tired. Like some of it's just like, I'm tired. I know they won a World Series this way, but they've been really bad since. I'd like to maybe target power instead of defense for once and just see what happens.
It seems to work out for a lot of other teams that score more runs. They find ways to just keep scoring more runs. Even if we're not great at defense, we'll just score more runs than the other team. Because honestly, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. The team that scores the most runs wins. So how about some corner outfielders on the open market? For me, I would love, and I know this isn't going to happen, and Chris and I have talked about this before, I would love to see them at least try to compete for a Cody Bellinger. That was a talk a couple of years ago too, because he struggled. It's not going to happen. They talked about Chris Bryant a couple years ago too.
Keegan is so optimistic.
I would love. I just would love them to
this.
show we're willing to have the conversation about players like that. Now, again, Cody definitely priced himself out as a potential MVP candidate in a resurgence here. But the name that's been floating around the last couple of days, and Chris and I talked about this off air earlier too. There's been a few reports coming out of meetings that the Royals have interest in Lourdes Gurriel from the Arizona Diamondbacks, coming off of a World Series appearance. Tremendous season. a guy that's bounced around a couple teams, but he's capable of playing multiple spots. Had a really solid year. There's been reports of a potential 4-year to 5-year deal out there. So that's, I think, the first bigger name I've seen pop up so far in the offseason. Thoughts on him, or are there any other guys that you were kind of targeting or you think JJ would go after? That makes sense.
I was talking with JJ not that long ago about some of just general philosophy stuff when it comes to that. He's not going to tell me straight up who they're trying to sign yet. I'm sure we'll have him on the show here in the next couple of weeks, and I'll try to get that out of him. But Gurriel, the reason why I think they're actually really interested in him is they can't exactly replicate James Shields from the pitching perspective to get everybody into this championship mindset. You can do that with Gurriel. He was on the Astros team that went to the World Series, with the Diamondbacks team who just went there. The guy's a winner. He's not going to tolerate losing. He's kind of a hard right. He comes in and immediately is like, I'm not sitting around here to be bad. And I think that one of the targets they go after is going to have to be that. I assumed Tommy Pham would be interesting to them. And that style of outfielder would probably be interesting to them. To me, Gurriel's kind of like the perfect fit of budget, price, championship caliber-esque player, right? Where it makes sense to me. But I assume that they're buying, if they're going to buy one outfield, I assume they're going to get one corner outfielder. So, I don't know why those two guys wouldn't be mentioned. I'm trying to be Bellinger seems, I don't know what his recent projections are. So I don't think he's coming to KC.
What about a guy like a Jock Peterson, a Derrickson Profar?
It's funny,
Michael
those
Brantley.
me a lot more about 2.5 years ago. Than
Right.
That's the problem I keep having with this list. Even like an Eddie Rosario, who's still got some pop, but he's been slowing down. Andrew McCutchen, a free agent. All these guys are a little bit older. The one that I find most intriguing that just seems perfect for a Royals situation, and I don't know if he would actually come here, but that's Kiermaier. He just seems the perfect guy to play center field. His name's popped up a couple times over the last few years as a replacement for center field. Just that stud defensive guy out there. Doesn't have a whole lot of pop in the bat as much as he used to, but a guy, he just feels like a Royals center fielder guy there. I know it's not the corner outfield, but that's
but for the first time in a long time, the Royals might be able to get away with a little less power at a key outfield spot. And I would never rule out somebody who played with the manager previous. They kind of like their guys every once in a while where they're like, hey, he knows who I am and he'll believe in the system I'm in, which kind of makes sense with Kiermaier. I think it's important when you go around the diamond. That's why where I think you could take a light hitting center if you wanted, because you have way more power than most teams at shortstop. You have good power at third, a little less than average, but you have good power at third, above average power at second, good power at first and DH, right? Great power at catcher if Salvador Perez is still here. So if all those guys are going to be in the mix, then, nobody's a 50 home run guy unless it Bobby, maybe one day. I wouldn't rule it out for Bobby. But you've got a lot of 20 to 30, right? 25 to 30 home run guys. So maybe you could get away with Kiermaier. I'd like him to go for power in the corner and just let the guys they have in building handle center. They do. I know I know that they think Kyle Isbell, despite the fact he's not traditionally fast enough to play center at Kauffman, they like his route running as much as anybody they've had in the building in years. So they think he can play it. They know Drew Waters can play it. They've got some guys that if they got a piecemeal center together from a defensive perspective, they can. That's kind of why I think they should target that corner outfielder with more power.
Yeah. Chris, do you have any corner outfielder guys that are high on your list?
I kind of like Hunter Renfroe for the same reason Cody brought. He did play with the Rays 3 or 4 years ago. It's been a little bit of time, but he's kind of older. He didn't have not coming off his best season, but he's a guy that can play good defense and right and still got a little pop. It'd be a lot like the Jeff Francoeur signing, kind of a guy at the end of his career that plays good. I know Jeff wasn't great, but that's kind of what it would be like. And I think I want him to go for pitching. So that means that they have to get a guy like that, I'm fine with it. I don't swing at Gurriel, take a couple swings, but don't break the bank for these corner guys because there's not a lot out there that they're going to really be in the market for.
They could use a little lineup protection for the young guys. I know that all these guys I'm talking about have power, but just one veteran bat who can hit 5th or 6th, can just kind of shore things up, or if you want to throw him to protect Bobby, whatever it is, that like one extra bat before you get to the lower end average guys feels like it'd be nice protection. Because there were times last year because of the injuries that when you got to like 6th in the order, you were like, uh-oh. Like Michael Massey for a chunk of the year was hitting like 4th or 5th for this team. And you're like, okay, I like Massey. That's too high. Like he shouldn't, or he should be hitting like way higher, right? Like make him a second guy or, like put him somewhere where the damage makes more sense. He's not a cleanup guy, but because of like Vinny and all these other injuries, it just kind of piled up. I also wouldn't be surprised if they just like brought Soler back, if they just wanted a cheap outfielder to stick out there to slug homers.
Yeah.
I mean,
that was another one I saw pop up a lot
Soler
today. Yeah. There's been a lot of talk on Soler the last couple of days I've seen, but there's some rumor has it that he's looking for a 2-3 year deal, and I don't think that's interesting to the Royals. So unless his market falls down, but maybe not there. But I guess then let's lead that into the big question, I think, of the offseason. It's one that I don't think Royals fans want to have the conversation on, because I think most Royals fans don't want to see this move happen. And that really is the question of what to do with Salvador Perez. Chris and I have said plenty of times to each other, he's probably the most valuable trade piece on the team. He's got a hefty contract. There's plenty of interest out there in the market, but he is a Royals guy through and through. I have a hard time with this because to me as a Royals fan, like I don't care about the future of the Royals in the sense of if I have to move Salvi to get better, I'm content keeping Salvi until we're better personally. But where do you stand with that? And what's kind of your take, or what are the inclinations you get from the Royals on that front?
I mean, they fielded serious offers for Salvi. I don't know if they were like on the doorstep, but they were close, like maybe a player away, like, hey, we're disagreeing on one more piece of compensation away from dealing Salvador Perez at the deadline last year. So I think it's very real. And look, I think I used to be very resistant to it, the same way any Royals fan would be. He's a World Series hero. He played in back-to-back World Series. You want him to retire a lifer as a Royal. All the reasons that just make sense. And he is still valuable as a hitting catcher for a variety of reasons, and a guy who gets behind the dish a lot. But he is like the key cog that kind of unlocks your ability to do different things. The second you shed his finances, what we're talking about, right, with these pitchers that you want to be able to afford or be able to afford a corner outfielder in that, it just kind of unlocks it, which is why I've come around to the idea that if they move Salvi, I'm okay with it. And for as much as we just said Gurriel is that guy who comes into the Royals and he's like, I'm not screwing around, I'm here to win. Salvi means that to a lot of other teams in baseball. So like to the White Sox specifically is one of the teams we know he's talking to, but he means that to guys like Pedro Grifol or these other guys who just know Salvi will do his job every single day and loves to win and is an easy guy to play for when he is winning and all of those things. And so I was hesitant for a long time, but I think you can win without a catcher like Salvador Perez. Most major league teams do. There was a team, I mean, again, serious playoff contention again this year, and there was still Martin Maldonado is, like still floating around on baseball rosters. So if like really good functional franchises can just roll in whoever at catcher or rotate 2 or 3 names at catcher sometimes versus what the Royals have been able to do, it's hard to think that that's the thing that's holding you back from winning again.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because how often players move nowadays are desensitized to it, but I have no issue with moving Salvi. Like he won his World Series, he's clearly a Royal. It doesn't matter what he does somewhere
he's getting
else.
A statue, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like since that's already in stone, like you said, if it's going to open up the Royals to do other things, I'm all for it. And I think you saw his value going back even more to like the players during the World Baseball Classic. Like he's on a team with all these high, Miguel Cabrera on Team Venezuela, and Salvi was the captain of that team. Like you could sense it if you watch that. And I think there's a lot of respect around the league. And I don't know how much that costs like in the actual trade market, but I think what he brings to a team is maybe more valuable than we give him credit for.
Catchers always have value. Dayton told me for years that he's like every trade deadline for like 3 years, the player, like not the biggest offers, but the player he probably got the most calls on for 3 consecutive years was Cam Gallagher, because people value catching. And at that time they're like, well, you're not giving us Salvi, so are you interested in giving us your backup catcher? Because we could use another guy just back there getting those innings. So, I mean, people value it still. I don't know that you're going to get the haul unless you're willing to eat a chunk of his contract too, but there's still value out there. And it just depends a lot of these trades is like, if you just get the right guy. I remember looking at that Aroldis Chapman deal, be like, oh, they got pretty good return, not bad for that. But again, I didn't know Cole Reagans was going to pitch like a top 5 pitcher in baseball the rest of the way. If I'd known that, I'd have been like, it's an absolute home run.
Yeah, I kind of kept waiting for just that start, to where it was going to be 2 innings of 9-run ball, and it just, in typical Royals fashion, just didn't happen. So that's like, I felt very weird over this last decade, almost decade of Royals baseball, to not have an asset, come back through and look like that. But I think we're getting close to the end. So like, we've talked about quite a few names, some different moves. Do you have like a starting 9-ish and an opening day starter? Doesn't need to be perfect, but
I think they'll trade Salvi.
Yeah.
So pencil me in for Fermin, I guess, is there, I think they'll go back that direction for catcher. I think I'd be stunned if the infield to start the season is not Garcia, Witt, Massey, and I think Vinny, or at least some combination of Vinny over there. We can leave him in as DH/first base. I think it'll be MJ in the corner. I think it'll be Drew Waters in center, and then I think it'll be free agent to be named later in the other corner. Whether that be Gurriel, like we talked earlier, I'd pencil him in if it were up to me. That would be my guess for those 5. The starters, I think, like at least 3. We mentioned them already, right? We know that Reagans and Singer and Jordan Lyles will be in the starting rotation, I believe, to start the year. And then I think it's 2 free agents. I don't think, for the first time in years, I don't think it'll be one of these. I don't think it'll be Lynch and Bubich or Koar or Bolin, or it doesn't matter. You can name them all. I don't think it'll be some starter. I think Lynch will just be, hey, you can be around, and if you can prove you can be healthy, we'll give you a chance to start. But I don't think they're going to give him a spot this year like in previous.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty accurate of what's going to happen. It doesn't feel like there's a lot. I know a lot of fans are asking for a bunch of change with the disappointment of the season, but it just seems like there's not a whole lot of options right now until we know, are we spending money or are we not spending money?
Yeah.
I guess that kind of leads me to my final baseball question for you then. For someone who you speak with JJ frequently, to the fan who still has questions on what's different about JJ to Dayton. Now we're heading into a second offseason where JJ gets, full run again at the full baseball operations. What can you tell fans that you have seen from interacting with him and speaking with them to help us understand the differences between the two, or what we might see differently moving forward?
Sure. So I met with Dayton a lot too. Obviously, he was the general manager when I was covering the Royals full time. So I met with Dayton once a week for 9 months, probably. JJ was the person that, we've obviously maintained a good relationship and talk about baseball when we get the chance, and he comes on the show quite a bit. I don't think they view baseball the same way. Dayton, at the end especially, was very consistent in still thinking that his way had not gone past, and that there was a way to build a winning culture around the way that he had done it before. This speed and defense, and he could make these fringe Jeremy Guthrie starters into something that was enough piecemealed together. And I think that I never particularly was in love with the way that they taught hitting, even during the times that they were winning the World Series. It was kind of backwards from the way the rest of baseball was doing it. And I think you can tell that JJ was not, we talk about this like Andy Reid. This is the best example. To me, in my experience so far in this early going with JJ, is that he's not willing to just accept that the philosophy he once believed in is the only system that worked. Because since he's been in charge, when he was the general manager and Dayton was the president of baseball ops, he said, we got to change everything we work on it with hitting. And then when he became the GM and the president, right? Like when he's both, he's like, yeah, also we're going to change everything how we teach pitching. Like he wasn't content just because that was the system. And I'll be honest with you, think about it from any job you've ever had. You guys have regular jobs. I've had regular, doesn't matter, right? Have you ever once, if you ever met a single person who's like, man, my boss, he does it all right. Guy's got all the best ideas, bangers, nothing. It's all perfect. No. We always question the guy above. Like, this guy's screwing it up. I could be doing, we should be doing it this way, right, that way, the other way. They're just not the same person. They came up under the same organization. There are things they do philosophy-wise that have some similarities, but I think it's like 15% overlap, not 90% overlap. I just think there's a big difference with how they operate.
Yeah, I said it with the Aroldis Chapman signing. Like, that's a signing that Dayton never makes, and that landed you Cole Reagans. So that, We could dive into everything else, but I think that's the biggest, if you want to go move for me, that it's like these guys aren't the same. So,
and Dayton didn't win a ton of trades from a in season when the team was bad perspective. He won the big ones though, won Shields and won the others. So like my hope is that maybe the one thing JJ takes away is take a big swing. Don't be afraid to trade away players that people are afraid of. There were a lot of people who hated that Will Myers trade. Hated it.
really?
At the time. Oh yeah. Yeah. And when that trade happened, more people disliked it than liked it. They were like, I can't believe you give away number one prospect in baseball. Ugh.
I remember being a senior in high school and like still getting the Sports Illustrated when that trade was made, like being so pumped because I didn't know any better. I was just some 17-year-old kid that was just excited the Royals won 80 games the previous year or whatever it was.
Yeah.
So like,
well, but like
I didn't realize
I finally got it at the time. It's like they're finally 80 games. They have the number one player in all of minor leagues. Why wouldn't they just call him up and be great?
Yeah.
And instead they took a swing that led them to, back-to-back World Series trips. That's the one thing the one thing I'm not sure about when you make me say, hey, who are the starting 9, who are the starting 5, is does JJ have a card up his sleeve that he's willing to deal Brady Singer? Mm-hmm. Right? There's teams, lots of teams who call on Brady Singer, right? Tons of teams across the league that are interested. He is a young, controllable starting pitcher. Teams will pay a lot for a player like that. Is he willing to sell himself or sell Brady Singer away in order to try to make a more complete roster? That's the thing I don't know about Jay yet. Would you just take a massive risk?
Yeah, is he going to trade your boy Vinny this offseason too?
I don't think so. He's coming off the injury. He'll be okay.
Yeah, right. For sure.
I told Vinny, I was like, look, if you sign like a contract extension, could you at least break it on the show? We've never really broken news of the show. Can you just come on and be like, oh, by the way, I signed a contract. Like, oh, thanks, Vinny.
Nice. In the middle of talking about Jets football and the hope of Aaron Rodgers coming back.
Yeah, that ain't happening. He ought to give up on that. I think he's given up on that dream at least. I don't think he thinks I don't even think he thinks Rodgers coming back.
Perfect. Well, hey, I think that's a good place to kind of wrap up this conversation. Cody, I do have one question for you unrelated to baseball. We're heading into the holiday season. Thanksgiving's coming up, and everyone knows that you are the baker around the area. Do you have any go-tos for Thanksgiving or any holiday baking tips you want to share?
Okay, so it took me a long time. I make Thanksgiving dessert for my family. I usually try to do 3 things, and it's always something apple-based, something pumpkin-based, and something chocolate-based, right? We're covering it across the board. The mistake I made on apple pies for years, and I don't know why anybody didn't see me before, is I spent a lot of time like trying to make the lacing look good and the top look pretty. Make it on wax paper and just lay it on top of the pie. Don't make it on top of the pie. No, I was doing it wrong this whole time. I was like trying to build it on top of the pie and it's lumpy and uneven. And it's like, so you got to maneuver it and move it. No, that was the wrong way the whole time. I should have read a book on that, I guess. Just build it on a piece of wax paper. You can just flip it over on top. It's problem solved. This year, I don't know. I might do a tart instead. And I'm thinking about making actual chocolates. I was looking at molds. I was willing to maybe step in the Christopher Elbow game. We'll see.
Okay. I love it. Love it.
Perfect. Well, Chris, you got anything else?
No, Cody, I just appreciate you coming on. I know, doing this every day, it's kind of hard to, not always ideal to come on. So we appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's going to wrap us up here again. Cody Tapp joined us here from 610 Sports Radio, talking a little Royals offseason. As the offseason progresses, Chris and I will hop on and talk a little bit more as we know information, any potential moves. Obviously, we'll get into that. I don't want to talk too much baseball because I know offseason is not really where all the baseball excitement is, but we'll get into that. But as far as podcast goes, you guys can find us on Spotify and YouTube. Hit us up at KC Sports Authority. You can hit us up on all of our socials below there, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at KCSA Pod. Don't forget to be checking out all the fun stuff that Chris and CJ do with the Aftermath. They've got all their Chiefs content for us here on YouTube at Aftermath_KC on Twitter. They've got their bi-weekly or weekly episodes. Right now we're in the middle of the bye week for the Chiefs, so good time to talk Royals, but they'll have some more Chiefs content coming your way. And of course, we got a lot of KU football and KU basketball coming down the stretch. But that'll wrap things up for this episode here. And again, Cody, thanks so much for joining us. And maybe we can chat with you more down the road.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.